start with our conference at the very beginning and ask ourselves what really happened in Russia in 1917. Was there a revolution at all? Alexander, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yuri, and I would like, first of all, to say that I will address this conference in English, and I'm very grateful to the Institute of Contemporary History and particularly to Yuri Gašparić for this kind invitation to be here in Ljubljana in Slovenia in the very busy year of the centenary of the 1917 revolutions. Yes, we are in October, but we are, of course, talking about a very complex moment of transformation that comprised both the February and October, and in the meantime, the independence, the Declaration of Independence of Finland, which is also 100 years ago. Let me briefly start with the problem of historical commemoration of the revolutions of 1917 as it exists these days in Russia. And if I may ask to show, I will have a few slides here for you to sort of to get sort of my presentation structure. Can you do the next slide, please? Yeah. Well, you may think that the year 2017 provides many opportunities to commemorate, if not celebrate, the 100th anniversary of the revolutions, or the October Revolution in particular, but it must be remembered at the same time that the present political regime in Russia is anti-revolutionary. So there is a real tension of how do you celebrate a historic event that contains the word revolution and yet not disrupt the legitimacy and the politics of the day. And as a reference, I would like to show to you what happened with the centenary of the breakup of the World War I. I would argue that in 2014, 15, 16, all the way to 2017, there was much more commemoration and celebrations of that historic event as compared to the revolutions of 1917. And on the left side, you see the picture of the monument that was actually erected to commemorate World War I, the fallen soldiers and heroes in World War I. Ironically, it was erected in the city of Kaliningrad. So if you are familiar with the map of the Russian Federation and the time, that would seem to be a very unlikely place to erect a monument to World War I, but there is nothing like that happening in connection to the revolutions of 1917. And my point is that it is exactly the political dimension that prevents the official regime from embarking on a wide program, official program of celebrations and reflections on the meaning of 1917. However, even though this is true about the state of commemoration from the official point of view, there is still a very active program going on of commemorating 1917 as the beginning of a new political order. And on the right-hand side, you will see a picture of the Amosov Museum in Yakutsk. And there is an official program, there is sort of conferences and celebrations of the revolution, because the contemporary form of the Russian Federation does include national autonomies and national republics. And if you think about Tatarstan, if you think about Yakutia and many other national republics in the contemporary Russian Federation, you will understand that their status of autonomy, their status of a federal land, goes back all the way to 1917, and this will be pertinent to what I will be talking, addressing the question of whether it was a revolution or an imperial collapse or an imperial breakup in 1917. Let me turn to historiography. The current historiography of the Russian Revolution of 1917 has changed the way in which this event is interpreted. The idiom of imperial breakup or even decolonization has been firmly entrenched in the repertoire of interpretations of 1917. It even displaced the notion of revolution from the reading of this historic moment, as Stephen Smith has recently argued. Informed by the rewriting of Russian history before 1917, with the help of the concept of empire and colonialism, the new reading of 1917 highlights nationality and national movements in place of class, and transforms civil war into an ethnic conflict or even colonial war, such as the case with the recent interpretations of the civil war in Ukraine and Central Asia. The idiom of imperial breakup and decolonization necessarily invokes the category of nationality and nation-state as the ultimate destination of the historical process. One can even argue that the very change of the terminology results in the teleology, the new historic teleology of the transition from empire to nation, because that transition has been a central element of the modern historiography, and it has been supported by the studies of nationalism and some of the interpretations of modern history of empire. If we can go to the next slide, I can briefly introduce to you, well, this is the decolonization, but I don't have the moment to sort of go into detail. And the next slide. Well, this is from Benedict Anderson, no longer with us, an interview that was entitled, "We Study Empires as We Do Dinosaurs." I can't go into great detail with this quote, but you can see that the basic summation of the modern historical process here with Benedict Anderson is that it's binary. It's the teleological way of moving from empire to the world of nation-states. Empires are always archaic, empires are always doomed to destruction, and the nation-states are the modern political forms that replace empires. Well, if you follow this logic, I mean, this is a theoretical writing, but you can also see this logic embedded in modern historiography. If you follow this logic, it's really difficult to understand 1917 as a moment, a historic moment, that not only put the end to the Russian Empire, but announced a new world, the Soviet history, the world of Soviet history. And to emphasize the difference, I would like to draw a comparison with the fate of the Ottoman Empire in the end of World War I. Here we have a clear imperial breakup and a clear imperial collapse. What is even more important is that out of the imperial debris, there emerged a modern Turkish nation-state, a Kemalist Turkey that really put a lot of effort into the nation building, and that was the exit from the empire. That would confirm to what Benedict Anderson says in this quote, but looking at the early Soviet history, and indeed the entire Soviet history in the 20th century, that will be very difficult to make sense. Because what happens is not a transition to the Russian nation-state, but rather, I would argue, it was a moment of imperial transformation. Let me very quickly step back and address the very important category of nationalism and nationality in the Russian history in the late imperial period, that is right before the revolution of 1917. In whatever time I've left with, very briefly, I would like to say that the category of nationality was gradually emerging as a form of identification and political claim in the course of the 19th century and certainly in the early 20th century. But it fell short of becoming the foundational idiom of politics in late imperial Russia. More importantly, its application was differentiated and did not always dovetail with the claim of exclusive political community and sovereignty. The old imperial census of 1897 failed to be structured around the category of nationality. Rather, religion, mother tongue, and region, location, were more important categories employed in this imperial census. The ethnographic category of nationality has been also challenged by the category of race, but as shown in the work by Marina McGillner, the category of race in its interpretation by the dominant school of physical anthropology in the Russian Empire did not dovetail, did not link to the category of nation, and thus the possibility of a racialized form of Russian nationalism did not come true as a result of this transformation. Very quickly, next slide. The nationalizing monarchy under Nicholas II, the last Russian emperor, was a big factor in the political dynamics in late imperial period. This is from 1903. This is how Nicholas II imagined the multi-ethnic Russian empire. He thought of really carving out of the space of empire a place for a Russian national body, for a Russian nation, and he performed it in such a manner by donning 17th century dresses in the imperial receptions in the Winter Palace. Well, I would argue that even though nationalism and nationality did not become a foundational idiom of Russian politics, the nationalizing policy under Nicholas II contributed definitively to the crises and ruptures in the imperial space, and the ultimate push for the February 1917 revolution did really happen out of this phantom of the nationalizing policy of the Russian monarchy. Nicholas II never accepted the institutions of representative government, and the very beginning of the February Revolution was his dismissal of the Russian imperial parliament, the State Duma. My argument is that as the monarchy was abandoning the space of supranational imperial sovereignty, that space, that political location, was filled with other political visions and imaginaries, coming from public politics that was opened in 1905, and coming from the different political actors that occupied the Duma floor, the press, the political parties, and the political process in the late imperial Russia. What I focus in the rest of my paper is what I call the alternative political imaginary that emerged as a response to the nationalizing policy of the Russian monarchy and used the possibilities of public politics of the Duma period, 1905 to 1917. When you are thinking about the transformation of empires, you naturally come to the conclusion that federalism as a concept and practice could be seen as a natural political heir to the empire. But when you look very closely at what is happening between 1905 and 1917, you see that political debates of the Duma period did not form a consensus on this question. Federalism was suspected of belonging to aristocratic and undemocratic political cards. Such was, for example, the perception of the Polish federalist thought at the moment. There were several criticisms of the concept of federalism, but what I see in this process is the establishment of the idiom of the discourse of decentralization and autonomy, around which a real political consensus formed in this late imperial period. I have to skip a lot in my paper, but basically I argue that the broad definition of autonomy satisfied the varying political cards in existence in late imperial period. And what is even more interesting is that federalism as a concept was not written off in this debate, was not dismissed. Federalism was used as a concept promising the universalization of the politics of autonomy. Very briefly, the Polish core, the Polish political representation in the Russian Empire argued for the national autonomy, and it was often assumed that because of the level of cultural development, because of the developed politics, the Polish national autonomy is a natural claim. However, you can see from the Ukrainian representatives, from the Kazakh representatives, and really many others joined, you can see an argument that you cannot treat autonomy exclusively. You should be able to universalize the claims of autonomy, and the catchword for that was a federalist interpretation of the autonomy. Can we go next? This is the reception of the nationalizing monarchy under Russia under Nicholas II. Can we go very fast forward? I argue that what happens, the most interesting element, what happens in late 1917 and early 1918 with the Bolshevik takeover in Petrograd, was the re-emergence of that discourse, alternative political discourse of autonomy and decentralization in the form of federalism as the moment of consensus. And what is interesting is that way until the end of 1917, Lenin did not like the concept of autonomy. He never wrote on the concept of federalism. In fact, correcting the mistakes of his comrade Iosif Vissarionovich Stalin, he needed to publish in 1917 The Rights of Nations to Self-Determination, where he attacked the position the autonomy and federalist solution could be a political stance of the Bolshevik Party. Yet, right in winter of 1918, he embraces the concept of autonomy and federalism. Founded in 1918, the Russian Socialist Federative Soviet Republic was declared to be a federation. My argument is that the Bolsheviks, by taking power, realized that there is a broad consensus on autonomy and federalism in politics that was formed before 1917, and they basically hijacked that political card. Coming back to the question of how do we interpret, is it an imperial breakup or an imperial transformation? You can see that Article 2 of the first Soviet Constitution declared a free union of nations as a federation of national republics. So one principle was put in up front, that this is a union of nations. Right? So this is one way to think about how to sort of rearrange the political space of the former empire. Article 10, however, you can see the tension here, because there emerges the concept of the people, and the sovereignty rests with the people. So you can argue that instead of the union of nations, it's a national union, where the people are described with reference, of course, to class. This is the toiling population, or the working people of the country. My argument is that we need to reintegrate both revolution and imperial breakup in the form of the imperial transformation. You cannot understand what is happening here, the Declaration of Federation, the recognition of the rights, of the universal rights of national minorities, without the radical stance of the Bolsheviks. Yet, if you're reading Lenin, you cannot understand how the early Soviet policy evolved into a policy of a federation, evolved into a policy of granting autonomy, sometimes very pragmatic, but still shaping definitively the early Soviet period and subsequently the present state of the Russian Federation. I'm afraid I have to wrap up here.
About 2 minutes.
But maybe in the questions and answers.
Okay.
And I would like to thank you for your attention.